Hey, welcome back, Better Call Saul fans. Today we are going to go through 13 things that we learned in Season 6, Episode 13 of Better Call Saul, titled Saul Gone, and this is the series finale. If you have not seen this episode, do not watch this video. If you have not watched the entirety of the series, do not watch this video. You have been warned. Quick interruption, before we get into those 13 points, I do want to say this show really brings up a lot of weighty questions. Are people able to find redemption? Are people able to forgive themselves? Are they able to forgive other people? Why do we do what we do? How do we get dragged down by the people around us? How do other people lift us up? Are we able to fundamentally change who we are? How do we make amends for the mistakes that we all make? And as I've been contemplating this series finale after watching it, 15, 16 hours ago, all of that stuff is really weighing on me. And those are really heavy topics. And so as I was getting towards the end of my points, especially point 12 and 13, I really broke down into tears. And I did not actually remove that from the video because I just feel like if a show brings out this kind of emotion, I think it's okay to talk about that emotion and bring that emotion into how you look at the show and how you think about the show. So I did edit out like one part where you really couldn't understand what I was saying. But other than that, it's raw emotion, and especially in points 12 and 13. So I hope you can still hear the audio, and I hope you had, a similar kind of, emotional reaction and a really, heavy processing of the show the same way I did, because I think that's when a show really hit the mark is when it really touches you deep down inside. So I hope you like the video. I hope you can hear all of the video, and let me know in your comments down below. The very first thing that we learned is that I have the smartest people on my YouTube channel in the entire world. So last night I posted a poll on YouTube about how the show was going to end, and the people that answered it absolutely nailed it. Now I did take this screenshot right after I finished the episode, so maybe there was some late votes in there, but before the episode even started, around 55 to 60% of the people that were voting said that the show would end up with Saul Goodman in jail and alive. And so I personally thought that it would be a darker finale where he would actually commit suicide. I was wrong, and kudos to everyone who voted in the poll and that called it correctly. The second thing that we learned was that Mike's send-off was pitch perfect. The very first flashback that we see in this episode is of Mike and Jimmy in the Bagman episode in the desert, and Jimmy asked Mike what he would do if he had a time machine. If they could take that $7 million of Lalo's bail money and they can go back in time, what would they do? Mike at first wanted to go back in time to December 8, 2001, which we have to assume is the date that his son Matty died, but he then changes his mind, and he goes back to when he takes his very first bribe and how he would change all of his choices at that point. I thought that was a beautiful and fitting end to Mike's character, at one point showing that he has really a lifetime of regret. And yet, here he is working for Gus, a drug kingpin. He's killing cartel members, and he's completely unable to get off this road that he set for himself decades ago. Overall, with Mike, I thought the last three scenes that he did were also pitch perfect. First, we have Manuel Varga, who really puts him in his place, and he ruins the notion that what he's doing is anywhere near justice. It's not. It's just violence upon violence upon violence. Then the next thing that we had of Mike is where he tells Saul about his detective work on Walter White, as well as his warnings to avoid him because he's an amateur, sentiments that Mike would later repeat in Breaking Bad. And then we get this scene with Saul in the desert one more time. I thought this was a great send-off to a great character, and I'm glad we got this extra scene with him. The third thing that we learned is that for so much, and maybe this is repeating for some of us, but for so much of Saul's life, he's been obsessed with money. Now, Mike asked Jimmy what he would do if he had that time machine, and Jimmy says he'd go back to the day that Warren Buffett took over Berkshire Hathaway, and he'd put his share of the cartel money into it. It reminded me of the scene in the very first season where Chuck and Jimmy are talking about money, and you can see how focused Jimmy is on money. So let me play that clip right now.
$700. Yeah, I might as well head down to Skid Row and sell plasma.
You're representing people who have nowhere else to turn. The money is beside the point.
Money is not beside the point. Money is the point. I keep telling.
And so Jimmy has had that focus on money throughout really the entirety of the show. Another great callback from this scene is that Jimmy asks Mike, why don't they just split that $7 million? Mike says it's not ours, and the wrong type of people would come looking for them if they did take it. We also have this really similar scene back in season 1 when Mike stole the money from the Kettlemans, which the Kettlemans obviously stole, and they used that money so that they can get the Kettlemans to turn themselves in. Jimmy asked Mike in the season 1 finale, why didn't we just take it? And Mike says it wasn't ours. So again, we're coming full circle with Mike and Jimmy's relationship, as well as really the overriding pursuit of money that Saul and Jimmy have had throughout the entirety of the show. The fourth thing that we learned is that Saul Goodman had one more great scheme. A lot of us have been asking, does Saul Goodman have one more virtuoso performance inside of him? I think he did. When he gets arrested and he's in that solitary confinement, he kind of looks like a broken man, but then he sees a carving out that says, my lawyer will ream your ass. And that gets his confidence back up, and he starts spinning a story that initially starts out as true. He starts telling the DAs, Anne-Marie Schrader, that Walt and Jesse kidnapped him. They put a bag over his head, put him next to an open grave with a gun on his head, and from that point forward, he did whatever Walter wanted because he was so scared of him, and that Jesse is still out there and could potentially come after him. Like all great lies that we've seen on this show, it really does start out with the truth, but then it devolves from there into his own story that really no one else could disprove, as everyone else involved in that story is dead with the exception of Jesse, and no one really knows where he is. Saul uses his incredible way with words to go from 1,000,000 years in jail, whatever it was, to only 7 years. And as he gets that concession, he has one last request to get that Bluebell ice cream, mint chocolate chip, no exceptions. So we see Saul had one more great scheme left inside of him. However, it's at this point when everything goes south for Saul, as we get into our very next point, which was point number 5. Kim was Jimmy's moral compass. When he starts telling the DA about a prominent attorney in Albuquerque who has been killed, they start chuckling and they say, "You mean Howard Hamlin? Your ex-wife already spilled the goods on that on the record." Saul's taken aback and he loses that confidence that he just had. He then talks to Bill Oakley about her on the plane, hears that she's facing a civil lawsuit from Cheryl, who is shopping for an attorney to come after Kim. While Oakley is in the bathroom after their first conversation, everything changes in Saul's mind. He recognizes that Kim took his mocking advice to turn herself in, and she actually followed through on it. And she, unlike him, has no scheme. She has no end game other than to do the right thing and to face accountability for her actions. And that's when Saul, and he's still Saul at that point in my mind, that's when he takes stock of what he's doing. He takes stock of his last Saul Goodman performance, and he decides to change course at that moment. And we're going to come back to Kim, don't you worry. The sixth thing that we learn, and I don't think I'm learning this, I think I'm just relearning this, is Walter is a miserable prick. When they're in Ed's basement and Saul's asking him about regrets, Walt, who just had his brother-in-law die right in front of him. His wife hates him. His son hates him. He's killed dozens of people. And he says to Jimmy his main regret is that the mean and manipulative Elliot and Gretchen, they pushed him out of Gray Matter, a company that he basically came up with. And that's his only regret. He's literally living in the shadows of every rotten thing that he's done to basically everyone in his life, and all he can think about is Gray Matter and something that happened 2 to 3 decades ago. Just when I think I cannot hate Walt anymore, he somehow gets worse, but that's great acting, so kudos to Bryan Cranston on that. The seventh thing that we learned is that Saul and Walt really show off their worst habits. Now, as I keep on thinking about this episode, I get to more of an appreciation of different scenes and the structure and how it's all placed together. And I'm actually liking this scene more than I did originally. I think this was a well-placed scene for them to bring back Walt and to examine each of their failures. Walter is self-absorbed, he's self-righteous, and he is constantly a victim. Saul, on the other hand, up to this point, has never been able to look back at his life and examine himself. So I think it's really fitting that each of these broken men on the run after causing mayhem all over Albuquerque, they are unable to point the finger back at themselves. When Saul says that he regrets a slip and fall injury that hurt his knee, Walt correctly scoffs at his response, saying, "So you were always like this?" essentially calling him out for saying that the knee injury is his biggest regret and not his sleazy behavior. I do also want to point out that this is Saul's last conversation with someone that really knows him before he has to go on the run and become Gene Takovic. This happened, I believe, in March of 2010, and then obviously once he gets his new identity as Gene, he's Gene all the way up until he gets arrested, and I believe he gets arrested in January of 2011. So he has probably had months to reflect on this comment and this conversation from Walt, and I have to imagine that when he's sitting on his couch in Omaha, he's probably reliving this conversation just like he did relive those Better Call Saul commercials as well. Now, the last thing about this scene is going to be my next point, which is number 8. Walt really reminds Saul of Chuck. Walt says to Saul, "You would be the last person I would hire if I were ever to sue gray matter." Now, Walt is smart, he's aloof, he's meticulous, and he always has a new insult for Saul, and he never really believes in him. Does that sound familiar to anyone that you all know? To Saul, Walt is just an extension of Chuck in a different form, dragging him down and bringing out the worst in him. It's really tragic, and it's also frankly really beautiful to see how they did this. I also want to point out, because I don't think this is another point, but they kind of have an order of importance in terms of these flashbacks, and each of the 3 flashbacks really reminds Saul of some of the most important people in his life. Obviously, Kim's going to probably take the cake there, but Mike, and then Walter, and then we'll get to our next flashback with Chuck. All of them had a really lasting impact on him. So I love the structure of those 3 flashbacks and how they set it up from least impactful to most impactful at the end. The 9th point that I want to point out here is that Saul, in the end, owns up to all of his mistakes for himself as well as for Kim. He had the ability to keep going down the road that Saul Goodman had paved for the last 6 years and to get out of jail in 7 or so years. Yet for the very first time in his life, he uses his incredible way with words to hurt himself, not to his own advantage. For the first time in his life, he ends up taking the hard road, not the easy road. For the very first time, we see the guy who routinely takes the shortest path between 2 points take the more honest and the more well-deserved path. We get to see Saul in all of his glory as a master of his craft, always staying one step ahead of everyone else, and that's unironically how he sticks the nail in himself in his own coffin. Instead of sticking with his deceitful story that he had spun, he owned up to the whole truth. The 10th thing that we learn is that Chuck was right and wrong about change. During the flashback that we get with Chuck in this scene, in this episode, we see a softer side of him. He wants to talk to Jimmy about his clients. He's worried that Jimmy's taking on too much by getting all of his groceries every single day, especially when he's starting a law practice. He wants to connect with Jimmy, but Jimmy can't believe it. And Jimmy doesn't want this heart-to-heart with Chuck. He doesn't believe it. And so as he's leaving, Chuck says to him, if you don't like where you're heading, there's no shame in going back and changing your path. But again, Jimmy is skeptical, asking Chuck, when have you ever changed? Now, as we all remember, this is a callback to Chuck's rant in an earlier season, either 1 or 2, where Chuck says to him, people don't change, you can't change, you're slipping Jimmy.
I know what you were, what you are. People don't change. You're slipping Jimmy. And Slippin' Jimmy I can handle just fine, but Slippin' Jimmy with a law degree is like a chimp with a machine gun.
The truth is that both of these characters could have changed at any point, but neither of them did. They were too rooted in their ways, their egos, and their spite to get themselves out of, as Chuck said, the same conversation that they always had. So we see Chuck simultaneously be right about people being able to change, yet we know that over the next few months and years, he's going to change that perception, and he's going to throw water on the idea of Jimmy being able to be a better version of himself. It's a beautiful final scene for a tragic relationship where they both needed each other to be at their best, but they were only able to bring out their worst. My 11th point is that for the first 3 seasons, Jimmy's trying to earn Chuck's approval. And in the last 3 seasons, Jimmy's trying to earn Kim's approval and Kim's love. We know how much Chuck meant to Jimmy and how that relationship led to his demise. When Chuck died, he needed Kim to be beside him to keep him in somewhat of the vicinity of the straight and narrow. He was never on the straight and narrow, but to keep him somewhat close, he needed Kim. And these last 6 years, when she was gone, he fell into his worst impulses. He had no Chuck or Kim left in his life, and he really needed one or both of them. But he had no one that he could depend on, no one he could count on, no one that would right his ship. And in the end, we see how the loss of each of those people led to his full embrace of Saul Goodman. The 12th thing that we learn is that Jimmy's love for and connection with Kim is going to last for the rest of his life. As we see Jimmy get acclimated to his new life in prison where he is adored by the other inmates, we see him get one last visit from his quote-unquote attorney who slipped in there with an expired New Mexico bar card. It's a fitting way for Jimmy and Kim to recreate one of their earlier ploys, where no one's really hurt by their deception, but they still appreciate being able to pull it off. And just like in season 1, they go back to smoking a cigarette, coming full circle with one of the most iconic pictures of this series, where Jimmy meets Kim in the HHM parking lot after Jimmy's outburst at Howard in the conference room. In that conference room scene, Jimmy foreshadows what's going to happen at the end of the series as he tells Howard, "And you will atone."
And you will atone!
Yes, he's saying that to Howard, but Howard did do his own atonement, and ultimately Jimmy needed to atone for his mistakes and his sins. But back to Jimmy and Kim. The lighting in the cigarette scene mirrors the one that we saw in episode 1, only this time the bars in the background are the prison bars that are keeping Jimmy in jail. And like they have done throughout the entire series, they do not need to express themselves verbally to get their points across. Look at Jimmy gently holding Kim's hands when she lights that cigarette. The way that they just stare at each other after everything they've done. No doubt pondering what could have been if they had each made different choices. Sorry, folks, I'm tearing up a little bit, but I'm going to keep on going. Yet, despite the tragic nature of Jimmy's fall and of their relationship, there's still love and affection. And you don't need words to show it. Jimmy and Kim, they say it on their face. And that cigarette light, it's the only color in the scene, and that says it for all of us. Tells us everything we need to know. There's still a connection there. There's still something there. There's still a spark. There's still hope. As Kim walks out of the prison, she walks by Jimmy on the basketball court, who can't keep his eyes off of her. In her face, there's a hint of sadness and regret. She pauses for the door to open, and Jimmy gives her one last finger gun, another iconic visual that they had together. We saw those finger guns when Jimmy said he would be practicing law as Saul Goodman at the end of season 4, and then we later saw it when Kim gave Jimmy the finger guns when she brings up the idea of plotting against Howard. So, is this a sign that Jimmy wants in on another game? I don't think so. I think it's a symbol of their love, of their connection. I think it's a symbol of the fun that they had, that neither of them will ever forget. That their relationship was not toxic for the entirety of their relationship. they had their great moments. It reminds me of the mid-season teaser song, which I will play if I do not get a copyright restriction, but if not, just look it up on YouTube. The song is A Little Bit of Rain by Fred Neil. And he says, if I should leave you, try to remember all the good times. Warm times filled with sunshine and just a little bit of rain. After Jimmy's finger guns, Kim has a deep sigh. And it seems like she accepts the gesture. She agrees with it, and she agreed with what Jimmy was saying there. And as she walks out of the gate, she looks back one last time at Jimmy, just like she's going to look back on their actions and their relationship for the rest of her life. The 13th point, the last point that I have here, is that he really is Jimmy McGill. There were two overarching questions surrounding the entire show. The first was, how does this nice, affable guy named Jimmy McGill, who sometimes cuts corners, how does he turn into this sleazy criminal lawyer named Saul Goodman? As I've said before, I think the show brilliantly answered that question starting in Season 1, Episode 1, all the way up to Season 6, Episode 9, Fun and Games, when Kim leaves him and then we have that time jump into Jimmy becoming Saul Goodman. Those 6 full seasons gave me everything I wanted to know about how Jimmy became Saul Goodman. The second huge question that the show asked is a more existential one, which is, who is he, really? Is he Jimmy McGill, or is he Saul Goodman? Is he a good guy underneath it all, or is he the worst of his impulses? And we got the beautiful answer to that question in this episode. He's Jimmy McGill. He's not Saul Goodman. People can go down a dark path, embrace the worst parts of themselves, engage in egregious behavior, but they can still change. They can still recover their humanity. They can still find redemption. Not just with themselves, but also with the people they love. And so, folks, again, I got to apologize. I'm getting emotional here, but the more I think about it, the more I process it, the more touching and the more beautiful I felt that this ending was. Jimmy, ultimately, he did get what he deserved, which is jail. But in the process, he got his soul back. Even though he was sentenced to 86 years in prison, he got his freedom back. He's no longer a prisoner to the worst parts of himself. He's no longer a prisoner to Saul Goodman. He is at peace. He is once and for all Jimmy McGill. Friends, thank you so much for sharing this show with me. It has been a privilege to have watched it with you and to chat with you all. I am not going anywhere. I will be talking about Better Call Saul at least for the next few months. There are many things that I want to discuss, but I do want to give a heartfelt thank you to everyone who has watched and commented. I hope you enjoyed the finale as much as I did. Love you guys, and I will see you next time. Bye.
Let justice be done, though the heavens fall. Sorry to keep you waiting.
What?
All right. Let justice be done, though the heavens fall.